Once upon a time, there lived a young woman whose mother's last wish almost ended her life. Her name was Sherry Chi, and she was not the kind of girl who people imagine scrubbing floors in someone else's house. She was educated, confident, and refined. She had an MBA from one of the most prestigious universities in the country. She understood business language, investment strategies, and corporate negotiations. She knew how to command the room without raising her voice. But on the night her mother lay on her dying bed, none of it mattered. The hospital room was quiet except for the faint beeping of machines and the faint smell of antiseptic in the air. Her mother held her hand tightly and whispered something that shocked Sherry Chi to her bones. "Go to this address," her mother said. "Walk there as a maid. Tell them the agency sent you, and never tell them that I am your mother." Sherry Chi thought that she had misheard. He made her. But her mother's grip tightened for a moment before losing it forever. And just like that, the woman who had built one of the biggest recruitment agencies in the country took her secret to the grave. Sherry Chi stood frozen beside the hospital bed long after the nurses covered her mother's face, the last wish echoing in her ears like a stubborn drum. "Walk as a maid. Hide who you are. Do not reveal that I am your mother." It made no sense. Her mother was powerful. She placed hundreds of workers in elite homes as well as multinational companies. Why would she want her only daughter to become a maid despite all the wealth that she had? Sherry Chi knew that her mother meant what she said because her mother was never one to be careless with words. Every instruction she ever gave had purpose. Every move she made in business had strategy. So why this? She thought to herself as she sat alone in her room, staring at the folded paper with the address written in her mother's handwriting. She stared at the address over and over again, wondering if she should go through with it. Something inside her told her that this was not punishment. It was preparation. But Sherry sure could not understand what she was being prepared for. 3 weeks after the burial, when the house had grown quiet and the condolence visits had stopped, Sherry Chi packed a small suitcase. She left behind her designer clothes, shoes, and every other item that screamed class. She removed the gold bracelet her mother gave to her during her graduation and wore simple clothes. She tied her hair back plainly and took a taxi to the address. The house stood tall behind black gates, old but dignified like it carried so much history in its walls. Her heart beat fast as she rang the bell. A woman opened the door as she smiled and invited her in. She was elegant, composed, and sharp-eyed. "Yes," she asked. "My name is Sherry Chi," she replied calmly. "I was sent by the agency to work here as a maid." The woman studied her face longer than necessary. Then she stepped aside. "My name is Aduri," she said. "Come in and make yourself comfortable," she said as Sherry Chi walked into the house, not understanding what she was getting herself into. Sherry Chi stepped into the house with careful steps, though the floor itself was questioning her presence. The air inside felt different as it smelled of polish and quiet discipline. The walls were lined with old family portraits framed in gold, staring down at her like silent judges. She could feel her heart beating her truth. This was no ordinary house. It carried pride. It carried order. It carried something unspoken that troubled her heart. Adur walked ahead of her, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she showed her to her room. He was staying in the maid's quarters behind the kitchen. She said Callie as she nodded her head in respect and watched her walk away. The maid's room was small, neat and simple. A single bed, a wooden wardrobe, a narrow window that looked out to the back of the house. This was not what her degree prepared her for. This was not what her classmates imagined when they toasted to their future success. Yet here she was, alone in a small room, holding her suitcase, wondering whether obedience to a dying wish was bravery or foolishness. She unpacked her bags and got some rest, not knowing what the day ahead of her would bring. Morning came quickly, as she woke up early and began to tidy the house. She swept, mopped, and even began to prepare breakfast for the house, when a young woman walked in and began to speak to her in the most condescending way she had ever seen. "Is this meant for me or the dogs?" she asked as she gestured towards the food that she had prepared. Sherry Chi stood there speechless as she tried to understand what exactly was wrong with the food. The young woman, without wasting any time, picked up the food and threw it to her face. "In case you don't know, I don't eat cheap-looking meals," she said as she told Sherry to place her food like a queen. "We are not paying you money to bring your local ideas to our home." The young woman continued as she wiped him out as if her presence alone offended her. "My mother may tolerate rubbish, but I can't," she said as she pointed at the floor, ordering her to clean the place. "Clean that, and when you are done, redo my breakfast," she said to Sherry, whose cheeks burned not from the food that dripped down her face, but from the shame of being treated like she had no what. Still she did not shout. She did not fight. She simply bent down, picked up the plates, and cleaned quietly. The other cooks in the kitchen looked at her with pity, but they lacked the courage to respond. Everyone in the house had learned the law that tennis anger was real. If he met you outside, you got soaked. If you ran, you slipped. If you spoke back, you drowned. Chi-Chi washed her face, tied her scarf tighter, and cooked again. When she said a second time, she ate slowly, pretending that she was doing her a favor. "Better," she said with a cold smile on her face as she stood up and left the plate on the table like punishment, waiting to be carried. Sherry waited until she was done before she allowed herself to breathe properly. She went behind the kitchen and sat on a small stool for a minute. 1 minute only. And in that 1 minute, she asked herself a question that shook her to the bones. "Why did my mother bring me into this house?" she thought to herself as she envisioned the days ahead of her. Then niece's attitude was not something that she imagined herself enduring. She mocked the way she spoke, the way she walked, and even the way she held the broom. "You sweep like you're writing an exam," she said one afternoon, laughing as her friends lounged around like princesses, ordering her around as they made fun of her. Chirichi endured their insults. She kept her eyes low, although inside her heart was boiling with rage, not because she could not take insults. After all, she had survived jealous colleagues in the past. She knew how to handle people who smile, but hated you inside. However, this one was different. It was raw and direct hatred, one that was aimed to oppress and shame, and Sherry tried so hard not to break. She continued to act as the lowly maid, taking all the insults, hoping that one day she would finally understand why her mother had sent her into their home as a maid. That evening, when Ada returned home, her daughter Tenny met her at the door like a child who was reporting a crime. "Mom, the new maid you employed is useless," she complained. "I don't even know what that agency sent to us." Aduri removed her earrings slowly as she stared right at her, her voice calm but firm as she began to speak. "Tenny," she said, "you respect yourself in this house and keep to your lane. Allow the maid do her work and there will be no problem in this house," she said to her daughter, who stood there shocked to hear such from her mother. Tenny felt so humiliated. Her hatred for Sherry doubled as she made up her mind to send her away from the house. However, Tenny knew that her mother would not just buy into her shenanigans. So, she had to do something that would be so believable that even her own mother would send her away without batting an eyelid. So, she began to plot, and she thought of all the ways that she could achieve her goal. Denny stayed from a distance as she watched. She noticed how careful Chi-Chi was and knew that her plan would not work without her action. So one evening while Chi was preparing dinner, she overheard her mother call out from the living room requesting for some freshly squeezed juice. So Tenny used this opportunity to sneak into the kitchen. She saw a kitchen napkin hanging in the corner, and she grabbed it and put it into the fire that was cooking the meal. Tenny watched as it began to burn. She ran out of the kitchen immediately as she rushed off to her room, waiting for the commotion to unfold. Minutes passed and Denny realized that nothing had happened. She walked up to the kitchen again and met Sherry cooking with a smile on her face. There was no sign of burning, not even the smell of smoke, as Tennis stood there furious as she watched her plan fail. She returned to her room extremely angry as she thought of what next to do. In that moment, her mother called her into the living room to inform her that she had to take Sherry to their other house, the one at the outskirts of town, to clean up the place. And she had some family members coming that weekend to stay over for a family gathering. Denise's eyes narrowed the moment she heard it. She was so excited as she saw this as the perfect opportunity. The next morning, they drove together to their second house. Sherry sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly on her lap, as Tenny drove faster than necessary. The road grew emptier as they left the city behind. Tall grasses lined the side of the road as the houses became fewer. Sherry Chi could not help but feel that something was up. The strange unease lingered heavily in her chest, as if something unseen was walking beside them. Minutes later they arrived at the house, which was so large and quiet, almost too quiet, that they sent chills down her spine. Tenny unlocked the gate and drove in. "You clean inside," she said sharply as she took a stroll around the house. Sherry Chi nodded as she entered the house. Dust covered the furniture as the air was still and suffocating. Sherry Chi opened the windows to let some light in as she picked up her broom and began to sweep. Denny, however, stood by the corner of the house, and she made a call to an unknown number. "Now," she whispered as a wicked smile spread across her face. Tenny could not believe how easy this was going to be. She stood there excited as a black SUV pulled up outside the gate. Two men stepped out of the car as they looked around and approached her. Then he could not help but feel terrified as her heart began to pound. She had no idea who the men were as she asked to know what they were doing on her property. Penny tried to stop them, but they pushed her away as they gained entrance into the house. Sherry Chi could not help but hear the commotion outside. She peeked through the window and saw strange men who she did not recognize. Sherry Chi ran to hide as the men combed through the house in search of her. She pressed her back against the wall inside one of the empty rooms, her heart beating so loudly that she was sure that the men could hear it. Dust filled the air as heavy footsteps echoed through the house. They were not ordinary thicks, and Tenny could not help but wonder who they were looking for. She stood there terrified as the men showed her a picture of Sherry Chi, not as a maid. The picture was her graduation picture in a school that a maid could clearly not afford. They asked Tenny if she had seen the girl in the picture, and Tenny lied, saying that she was in the house alone. "I just came to pick up a few items," she said to the men, who could tell that she was lying. However, they could not risk being caught. So, they hopped back into their vehicle and drove away, leaving Tenny confused and terrified. Tenny stood there shaking long after the SUV disappeared down the dusty road. Her palms were sweating, her throat's dry, and she realized that this was no longer a childish prank. Those men were not just random strangers. They came with a picture, and Tenny realized that the girl who she had been mocking and humiliating was clearly more important than she knew. She was not a lonely maid, and Tenny could not help but wonder who she truly was. She called up her mother immediately as she narrated all that happened in the house. Her mother sent over some officers who escorted them back to the mansion. Sherry Chi sat there like a frozen chicken, and she wondered what the hell was happening. Tenny did not say a word to her as her entire body trembled in fear. The image of her maid in a graduation gown looking so rich and classy could not leave her mind as she wondered who Chi-Chi truly was. Minutes later they arrived at the mansion and met Aduri, sitting quietly in the living room. She was not panicking. She was not shouting. She was just sitting calmly as Tenny and Sherry Chi walked in to meet with her. Denny sat down across from her mother, as Chi-Chi remained standing for a moment, confused and overwhelmed. The room fell silent as she turned to Chi and asked who she truly was. "I know you are not a maid," she said to Sherry Chi, who began to shake in fear. She knew how powerful Aduri was and feared what she would do, now that she knew that she was not a maid. Sherry Chi stood there shaking as Aduri had to know who she truly was. Her mind raced as her mother's dying words echoed loudly inside her head. "Walk there as he may never tell them that I'm your mother." Sheraz's lips trembled as she realized that speaking would go against her mother's instruction. However, if she stayed silent, something terribly wrong might happen. What she knew was that she had to remain in the house because her mother had a reason for sending her there. So she cooked up a story as she informed Aduri that her family was once wealthy until she realized that she was not a biological child of the couple and sent packing. With nowhere else to go, she began to search for a job and met the agency who sent her to their home to work as a maid. Sherry made the story sound so sad that Yuri began to have compassion for her. She asked to know who the strange men were, and Sherry informed her that she had an idea. Truly, she did not know who they were, and the thought of dangerous men going in search of her terrified her in a way that she could not explain. Aduri listened quietly. She did not interrupt or even accuse. She simply watched Chi-Chi's face as she narrated her sad story to them. When she finished talking, the room fell silent as Tenny looked from her mother to the maid, unsure of what to believe. Aduri finally looked at her as she began to speak. "Whether your story is complete or not," she said slowly, "what matters is that those men are not looking for a mermaid." Cherich's heart skipped as the thought went through her mind in that instant. She stood there terrified as Sadhuri ordered her not to leave the house until the mystery had been solved. Then he took a picture of the men secretly, which Otter handed over to the police to go in search of them. Days passed, and the house no longer felt like a place of emulation. It felt like a fortress. Secretly at the gate was tightened. Strange cars were watched, and although Sheri-Chi was terrified of who the strange men were, she felt safe knowing that nothing could come close to her in Madame Madur's home. However, what Cherich did not know was that the real storm had not yet arrived. 3 nights later, just when everyone began to relax, they heard repeated gunshots at the gate. It was 2:17 a.m., and the entire house woke up in panic. Security men rushed the gates as lights flooded the entire compound. Then he ran into her mother's room shaking. "Mommy, they are shooting at the gate," she said repeatedly as her Dur stood up calmly. She did not scream or panic as she picked up her phone and made a call. Within minutes, sirens echoed in the distance as her house was now surrounded by police. The men at the gate fled before the police arrived, but something had changed. This was no longer random. This was pursued, and Sheri-Chi knew that it was all because of her. However, what she did not know was why and who these strange men were. Sheri-Chi stood in her room as she began to tremble. She could feel it deep in her soul that the danger was now closed, way closer than before. She sat in her room terrified as she thought of what to do. In that moment, she remembered her late mother's phone, which she hid in her box a while ago. She picked up the phone as she powered it on for the very first time in months. The phone lit up as strange messages began to pour in like a wave. Sheri-Chi went through the messages, but there was nothing suspicious that caught her attention. She searched the name Aduri, hoping to find anything that would explain why her mother sent her to live with Madame Maduri. Jessie combed through the phone, but there was nothing in the phone about Aduri. She sat there confused as the phone suddenly began to ring. The contact was saved on the phone as Do Not Pick. Chiri stared at the phone for some minutes as she deliberated on if to pick the call or not. Do Not Pick was clear enough for her, but something deep in her soul wanted to know why her mother will save a number in such a way. So she picked up the call, and the caller on the other end of the line stayed silent as Sheri-Chi said hello repeatedly. As she was about to hang up the call, she heard a male voice on the other end asking to have a meeting with her. Chi-Chi was so careful with her replies. She asked to know who she was speaking to, and the man promised that when they meet, he would explain everything to her. Chi-Chi's fingers tightened around the phone. "I will not meet you," she said firmly. There was a short silence on the other end. Then the man chuckled and replied, "You sound like your mother," he said. The words pierced through her. "I don't know who you are," she replied calmly, forcing strength into her voice. "And I have no reason to meet with you," she said as there was another pause. Then his tone changed colder, sharper. "You misunderstand me," he said slowly. "I was not asking." Sheri-Chi felt her throat go dry. "I am not interested," she said again, her voice shaking, despite her effort to steady it. "Do not call this number again." She ended the call. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. For a few seconds, the room went silent. Then the phone buzzed. A message, unknown number. She opened it. "If you do not make time to meet with me, I will create that time myself." Her stomach dropped. Another message came in immediately. "You cannot hide behind those gates forever." Her hands began to tremble as another message came in. "Tell your boss that she cannot protect you from me." Cherich's breath became shallow. He knew where she was. He knew who she was with. The phone rang again, but she declined the call. It rang again, and she declined it. Then one final message appeared. "Tomorrow, 400 p.m., Old City Bridge. If you don't show up, I will visit instead." Her knees weakening, she sat on her bed, staring at the screen like it was about to explode. He was not bluffing. This was not a random threat. This was someone who believed the whole time himself. She rushed downstairs. Aduri was still awake, seated in the living room as if she had been expecting something. Chi-Chi handed her the phone silently. Aduri read the messages slowly as she began to speak. "You'll meet with him," she said as she told Sherry-Chi of her plan. Sherry-Chi, although terrified, knew that the plan would work. She replied his text, agreeing to meet with him the next day by 4. The next day arrived, and Sherry-Chi headed to the old city bridge alone. The sky was gray, heavy, with a kind of silence that makes even birds afraid to fly. The river beneath the bridge moved slowly, as if it too was holding its breath. Her heart pounded in her chest with every step that she took. She wore simple clothes, no jewelry, no makeup, just fear wrapped in courage. At exactly 400 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows beneath the bridge, tall, still wearing a black mask. Sherry-Chi stopped walking. "You came," the man said, his voice cold, controlled, and dangerous. "I'm here," she replied, forcing strength into her trembling legs. "Say what you have to say because I don't have much time," she said as the man stepped closer. "Do you know why your mother sent you to that house?" he asked quietly as Sherry-Chi swallowed and stared at him. The man laughed, a dry, bitter laughter that sent shivers down her spine because she was a traitor. The word hit her like a slap. "My mother was many things." "So," she said sharply, "but never was she a traitor." "Oh, she was," the man replied. Then he removed the mask and Chi-Chi's words shattered. It was her mother's only brother, the one she had seen in photos that her mother told was dead. His face was now older, but the resemblance was undeniable. "You," her voice broke. "You're supposed to be dead." "No," he said calmly. "Your mother only wished I was." He stepped closer, his eyes burning with rage. "We built everything together. That recruitment agency you admired so much. It was only the front." Sherry-Chi felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "Drugs," he said bluntly. "We were in the business together. Distribution, logics, protection. I handled supply. And your mother, she handled movement." Chi-Chi's stomach twisted as she listened to the shocking revelation. "Your mother asked for her percentage to be increased. She said she deserved more, but I refused because the initial agreement was 7,030 from the start." His jaw tightened. "So she leaked my location to the police. She sent me to jail, and while I rotted behind bars, she took over everything." Cherich's heart began to race violently. "She destroyed my life," he said quietly. "Took my empire, took my name, took everything that I ever had." Tears filled Chichi's eyes. "You're lying," she said weakly as the man snapped and asked where her mother's money really came from. "Ask yourself why she was so powerful. Ask yourself where the money truly came from. I came out of prison ready for revenge and heard that your mother was dead. So I decided that her child would do," he said as he pulled out the gun from inside his jacket. Sherry-Chi froze in complete terror as she pleaded with him not to shoot. "When you get to the afterlife, tell your mother that I finished what she started." Her legs weakened as tears streamed down her face. Sherry-Chi closed her eyes, terrified as her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Walk there as a maid. Never tell them that I'm your mother." Was this the preparation? Was this the end? She thought to herself as a black SUV screeched to a stop next to them. Gunshots exploded through the air as her uncle stumbled back in shock. Bullets tore into the railing beside him. He fired wildly, but more shots came from the SUV as he dropped to the ground dead. Sherry-Chi screamed as armed men jumped out, pulling her down behind the vehicle. "Move! Move!" one of them shouted as they dragged her into the SUV and sped away. Her heart pounded violently as the car drove away from the scene and continued to drive. Several minutes passed, and the SUV approached the gates of a massive estate. They drove inside. The house was enormous, modern, guarded. Sherry-Chi stepped out slowly, her legs still shaking. She had never seen this house before and wondered how many more her madam had like this. She stood there humble. As the door to the house opened, a woman walked out of the house, and Sherry-Chi froze in shock to see her mother, the very woman who she thought died months ago. Sherry-Chi staggered backwards as she tried to understand what was happening. "You," she whispered. "You died." Her mother stepped forward. I had to. Tears flooded her face. You let me believe you are dead. You let me mourn you. Her mother's eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. I knew he was being released from prison, she said. I knew he would come for revenge. So you use me as bait? Chirichi whispered as her mother nodded her head in agreement. The word cut deeper than any bullet. I sent you to Aduri because she was the only client strong enough to protect you. Her mother continued. She has influence, security, connections. I knew he would come after you if he believed I was gone. So I had to fake my debt. Her mother said quietly. It was the only way to take him out. And the drugs? Sherichi asked weakly as her mother's eyes darkened. Silence filled the air as Sherichi looked at her mother, not as a grieving daughter, but as a woman who was seeing the truth for the very first time. You almost got me killed, she whispered as her mother stepped closer and smiled at her. I almost did, but you are alive. Chi-Chi stood there staring at the woman who she believed was untouchable. For the first time in her life, she did not see a powerful mother. She saw a woman who chose survival over integrity. As she stood there broken, sirens began to surround the entire house. For all this time, her mother had no idea that she was wearing a wire. The police was listening in on their conversation. As they overheard everything that she said, Sherichi stepped to the side. As the police took her mother in cuffs, she made up her mind that day not to continue her mother's footsteps. That evening when the news broke about the arrest of the powerful businesswoman who had faked her debt and run a criminal empire, Tenieduer's daughter sat alone in her room, staring at the television screen. The reporters replayed the footage of the arrest over and over again, and there, standing calmly beside the police vehicle, was the maid, who she had once humiliated, not trembling, not hiding, not small, but composed. Tenestro tightened. Every insult, every laughter, every order she backed, they echoed in her mind like accusations. She remembered the way Sherichi had bent down quietly to clean the mess that she made, the way she endured humiliation without retaliation, the way she stood under pressure when danger came. And for the first time, Penny understood something that shattered her pride. Power is not loud. Strength does not scream. And class cannot be faked. She had mistaken gentleness for weakness. She had mocked dignity. Dennis slowly turned off the television. The house felt quieter than it had ever done before. Not because the storm had passed, but because something inside her heart. The next morning, she walked into the kitchen not to command, not to complain, but to learn. And for the first time in her life, then he spoke softly to the staff, not as a queen, but as a human being. And while one young woman was learning humility, another was choosing her legacy. Sherichi took over the agency and ran it with diligence and integrity, rebuilding it into a legitimate business that placed people in homes and companies without secrets, without blood money, and without fear. She cooperated fully with the authorities, ensuring every hidden account and illegal tie was dismantled, even when it meant testifying against the woman who gave birth to her. It was not easy. It broke her heart, but she chose truth over loyalty to corruption. And so once upon a time, there lived a young woman whose mother's last wish almost ended her life. But in the end, he saved her from becoming the very thing that she feared. For she learned that survivor without integrity is still lost, and that sometimes the bravest thing a daughter can do is end the cycle.